Would you ever want to venture inside the terrifying dungeons and torture chambers that serial offenders use to torment their victims? Today, you will experience all the horror of these places as we delve into the dreadful world of serial predator Maury Travis. Imagine renting a cozy house somewhere in the suburbs. The rental fee turned out to be quite comfortable for your wallet, so you're rejoicing at this lucky chance, breathing fresh, unpolluted air, enjoying birdsong in the mornings, and admiring the view from your window. One day, you turn on the television, and in the crime report appears a photograph of your house, which they refer to as nothing other than Travis's House of Horrors. Maury Troy Travis was born on October 25, 1965, in St. Louis. Until age 11, the boy lived with his parents, Sandra and Michael, in the Carr Square residential complex. In 1976, during the period of suburbanization, when a huge portion of the city's population began moving to the suburbs, tired of constant noise, polluted air, and lack of greenery, the boy's mother and father also decided to purchase a simple ranch-style house in Ferguson. They believed they would be more comfortable living in fresh air, away from the big city center. New life, close to nature, began quite favorably for the Travis family. They busied themselves setting up their new dwelling, making friends, and raising their son. Many remembered Maury as a very quiet, withdrawn, and shy boy. He always respectfully greeted neighbors, and they considered him a sweet child with a kind heart. No one could even imagine that, subsequently, the young man would transform into a brutal monster. Apparently, the change in environment somehow affected the boy's parents because, 2 years after moving, they unexpectedly divorced. Maury remained under the full custody of his mother. His isolation became even more pronounced when, throughout his childhood and youth, the boy changed several different schools, and his photographs weren't found in any yearbook. They say, "Still waters run deep." This phrase perfectly described Maury Travis. Outwardly, he was a quiet, modest teenager who wouldn't hurt a fly, but he harbored rather sinister thoughts. Starting from age 13, he began showing interest in what death means. The young man often fantasized about whether he could take someone's life and began actualizing his sick fantasies on animals he found nearby. During that period, many neighbors' cats and dogs started disappearing. After finishing high school, Travis enlisted in the armed forces, serving 2 years as a medic and dental assistant. After discharge from the military, Maury briefly worked at a transport company and then took a position as a volunteer at a local nursing home. During that period, the young man suddenly realized that his life represented a series of random moments and lacked overall direction. Therefore, at age 22, Travis enrolled in Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia. However, having chosen what seemed to be the right path, he very quickly went downhill, becoming involved with prohibited substances. But where would a poor college student get money to support this harmful addiction? Desperately needing funds, Maury turned to crime. Thus, while home during spring break, over 8 days, he robbed 5 different shoe stores in northern and western St. Louis. Travis was easily identified when a witness to one of the robberies provided his description and named the car. Police arrested Maury. The young man didn't deny it but immediately confessed to everything. At trial, attempting to evoke sympathy and some leniency, Maury said he had been anxious and barely remembered anything about these crimes. To commit the robberies, he used only a plastic toy gun and thought he would get away with it. In addition to the allegedly slightly misguided student, the judge received several letters of support from people who knew Maury. They stated that the unlawful actions didn't reflect Maury's true character, that he was actually a good person, and that only prohibited substances had clouded his mind. The letters urged the court to offer him help instead of harsh punishment. When, 6 months later, Maury appeared before the judge for sentencing, he reported that he had completed rehabilitation and was now clean. All his recent time was spent only on becoming a useful member of society. Even former American politician from Missouri, William Lacey Clay, intervened on his behalf, writing the judge a letter requesting clemency. The congressman stated that Maury posed no threat to society and asked to grant him probation with the condition of voluntary service at a charitable community agency. However, the judge wasn't convinced by all these letters defending the accused, and he sentenced Maury Travis to 15 years imprisonment. This happened just 4 months before the young man's 24th birthday. Maury hadn't expected that he would be celebrating his birthday in a prison cell, so he immediately began making attempts to appeal the sentence. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. 2 months after being confined to the correctional facility, Maury wrote a letter to the judge, tearfully begging him to reduce the sentence and describing the harsh conditions of prison confinement. He complained that daily and hourly he contemplated the possibility of taking his own life. Maury spent his entire day in the cell and cried about his fate almost every night. He also mentioned harassment from other inmates, inedible poor food, and the absence of any conditions for normal living. At the end of the letter, Maury implored the judge to give him another chance in society, to replace his current 15-year term with a term of 120 to 180 days, because this time would be sufficient for him to learn his lesson once and for all. However, his pleas for clemency remained unheeded, and Maury was forced to adapt to his new environment. Understanding that he couldn't escape prison, Maury simply decided to behave reservedly, keep his head down, and quietly serve his time. However, he wasn't good at this either because, during the first couple of years behind bars, he received 13 warnings for behavioral violations. Despite this, in June 1994, after serving 5 years and 3 months, Maury was released on parole. Maury moved into a duplex 2-level house for 2 families, which he shared with neighbor Linda Harris. According to Linda, Maury was an excellent neighbor, quiet, friendly, didn't bring anyone over or throw parties, and never bothered anyone. In their house was a shared basement where the washer and dryer were located. Once, when Linda was downstairs, the neighbor scared her so much with his unexpected appearance that, after that incident, he always descended the stairs whistling some melody. He apologized for a long time afterward for making the elderly woman nervous. Linda's son also got along perfectly with Travis. A friendly relationship developed between them. The men often sat together on the porch, chatting and drinking beer. Despite how terribly illegal substances had derailed Maury's life, after some time, he again became addicted to white powder, and again, everything went wrong. 4 years after his release from prison, Maury violated his parole conditions and found himself behind bars again, receiving a short sentence for possession of prohibited substances. By 1999, Maury was released from confinement. For some time, he was recovering, not knowing what to do. In the summer of 2000, he got a job as a waiter at a restaurant located inside a hotel near downtown. There, he had several strange conversations with his colleague Dave. Once more, he mentioned that if he ever needed to dispose of items that nobody should find, he could do it in East St. Louis because there weren't many police officers there. A few months after this conversation, a dead body was discovered there. Dave's girlfriend worked as an intern at a news channel, and once during a meeting, Maury asked her if her channel had covered any reports about killings of women of loose morals in East St. Louis. Nothing like this had appeared in the media, so how could Maury know about this? On July 1, 2000, the body of 61-year-old Mary Shields was discovered in East St. Louis. Now Dave and his journalist girlfriend wondered, was this somehow connected to what Maury had said, or was it just a coincidence? Meanwhile, Maury settled in a house at 101 Fort Drive, St. Louis, Missouri, belonging to his family. This building had a basement, and the man, obsessed since his teenage years with harming those weaker than him, began conducting his dark deeds, only now on a larger scale than in childhood. Maury transformed the basement of his house into a sort of torture chamber. On days when he wasn't working at the restaurant, the man would walk the streets and pick up women offering intimate services for money. He would drive them to his home, get pleasure, and then, instead of paying, lock them in the basement, where he performed all sorts of perverted acts. Maury recorded all their moral and physical torments on tape. Sometimes, he forced women to participate in strange rituals, dressing them in white clothes and sunglasses, and demanding they perform wild dances. When the next victim bored the predator, he would simply dispose of her. Fortunately, for months after Mary Shields was found, Maury was once again arrested for violating parole conditions and was sent back to prison. This time, he spent several months behind bars, from November 29, 2000, to March 19, 2001. As soon as he was freed, Maury immediately returned to his dark deeds. Less than 2 weeks after his release from imprisonment, Alicia Grainwaite's remains were discovered in Washington Park. 3 days after this, another woman's dead body was found in East St. Louis, but they were never able to identify her. From May to October 2001, 4 more women endured torture and strangulation: Teresa Wilson, Veronica Thompson, Yvonne Cruz, and Brenda Beasley. On one woman's leg, traces of car tire treads remained, and swabs taken from 2 dead bodies showed the presence of seminal fluid. This allowed investigators to isolate the suspect's DNA. However, apparently, the abuse and killings of women of loose morals seemed insufficient to Maury. He wanted all newspapers to write about him as a serial predator and for his atrocities to be covered in the news. Police officers working on this case initially didn't connect all the deaths together, examining each case separately. It's possible that Maury might never have answered for his crimes, but the rays of glory so clouded his mind that he decided to play cat and mouse with the detectives. At that time, a newspaper had recently published an article about one of his victims, Teresa Wilson. After reading the note about the woman who died by his hands, Maury printed a map from the internet, marked the location of yet undiscovered remains of another victim, and anonymously mailed it to the journalist who wrote the article. From the very first phrases, it became crystal clear that Maury felt no remorse toward his victims. Instead, the man was proud of his crimes, actively seeking notoriety. The reporter who received the strange message immediately handed it to the police. The response team, investigating the location indicated on the map, found another set of skeletal remains belonging to an unidentified victim. Learning that the map was printed from a specific website, detectives managed to determine the IP address of the computer where the download occurred. Several days later, they received a response with a single IP address. The computer from which the download occurred was located at 101 Fort Drive, St. Louis, Missouri. This was the house where previously convicted Maury Travis resided. Early morning on June 7th, officers knocked on the door of the suspected serial predator. The obviously just-awakened homeowner answered the knock. He was quite aggressive, demanding police state a compelling reason for disturbing his sleep. No trace remained of the nice, withdrawn young man that most people who knew Maury described him as. When officers showed him the letter with the area map, he pretended it had nothing to do with him and was about to slam the door in the detectives' faces. But at that moment, they explained that the person who sent the letter did it from Maury's computer. The homeowner had no choice but to let the police inside. During the hour-and-a-half conversation, Maury tried to keep the discussion under his control. He frequently changed topics when asked uncomfortable questions and was practically certain he had managed to deceive the investigators. Suddenly, there was another knock at the door. It was the investigation team with a search warrant. That's when Maury showed his true face. He began using profanity and getting angry that he had opened the door to them at all. At that moment, the detectives already knew they would find something. This was evident from the homeowner's reaction, and very soon, forensics discovered bloodstains in the basement, on the floor, walls, under the carpet, and on the carpet's underside. This was blood from not one person but different people. While experts searched the ground floor, upstairs detectives were still talking with Maury. They showed him a folder with several photographs of women whom police considered his victims. Without any context, detectives asked Maury if he knew any of the people in the photos. The man carelessly looked at all the photographs and stated he had never seen them in his life. However, about 10 minutes after the conversation had moved to something else, Maury asked if he could look at the pictures of the dead girls again. Detectives immediately caught him on his words. After all, they hadn't said that all these women were no longer alive. Maury immediately realized he had slipped up. He lowered his head, was silent for a couple of seconds, then said he would show them the location of another victim in East St. Louis. On the way, the man confessed that he committed his first kill at age 19. It was an indescribable sensation of power and superiority. When the car was already approaching the bridge, following Maury's directions, he unexpectedly changed his mind, stating they should just take him to jail. After brief arguments, investigators understood that Maury wasn't going to show them anything. They took him to the police station and continued questioning to obtain a DNA sample. Officers pulled an old trick with a drink. The suspect was given a soda can, which he immediately drank, throwing it into the trash bin. A bit later, the empty container was retrieved from the basket and sent for testing to extract DNA and compare it with DNA taken from the deceased women. The samples matched. After this, authorities confiscated Maury's vehicle, and the tire tread pattern on it matched the imprint left on one victim's leg. Thus, detectives managed to link Maury to 3 specific women, and in the house on Fort Drive, a thorough search was still ongoing. A forensics team found several videotapes. One was labeled "Our Wedding Day." At the beginning of the recording, there actually was someone's wedding ceremony, but after a couple of minutes of viewing, the recording cut off and switched to something completely different. The footage showed a woman chained to a wooden post. Everything that happened next was so horrific and shocking that officers who viewed the tapes were recommended to undergo psychological counseling. After viewing the recordings, the number of Travis' presumed victims jumped to 12 women. Investigators also discovered torture tools in the house, a stun gun, newspaper clippings about some of his crimes, and videotapes where Maury tormented his captives. The criminal didn't just physically torture his victims. He also subjected them to psychological abuse. In one of the videos, Travis mocked a woman, asking if she wanted to say anything to her children and who was raising them while she spent time in his house. After abuse and torment, Maury simply took his victims' lives, then usually disposed of their bodies on the eastern outskirts of St. Louis. When Maury was charged and shown the collected evidence, he realized he would have no possibility of winning this case. Maury absolutely didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. He knew that behind bars, things wouldn't be easy for him. Although St. Louis County Jail management was warned that Maury should be placed under increased surveillance, the precautionary measures proved insufficient. On June 10, 2002, before facing trial for his crimes, Maury Travis ended his life by hanging himself with sheets in his prison cell. The man left behind a letter to his mother apologizing for all the pain he had caused her. In the message, Maury described how he had fantasized about such things since he turned 13 years old. Maury himself didn't understand where such thoughts in his head came from. Never in his life had he felt normal or happy. He considered his departure the best solution in the situation. Meanwhile, the perpetrator didn't mention a word about his victims. He didn't regret any of the stolen lives and felt no remorse. Maury wasn't concerned that he had caused anyone pain except his mother. Unfortunately, the true number of Maury Travis victims will remain a mystery. Although in the letter to his mother, he claimed he had sent 17 women to the other world, some believe the number of victims was around 20 people. 12 years after Maury went straight to hell, the house where he had lived recently was put up for sale. A young woman named Katrina McCoy rented the dwelling, not knowing who had lived there before. Maury's mother, Sandra Travis, rented her the property without revealing its history. One evening, Katrina settled in at home in front of the television. While watching the documentary Unsolved Cases, she suddenly saw photographs on screen of the house where she was currently located. Her hair stood on end with horror when she learned that in the basement, literally under her feet, several people had been deprived of life. The film showed the wooden post that still stood downstairs in the basement, and near this post, Katrina's 2-year-old daughter often played. The woman was so frightened and upset that she wanted to immediately terminate the lease agreement. She contacted Sandra Travis, explained the situation, thinking the homeowner would be understanding. Instead, she heard that she must stay in the house until the lease expired or pay the specified amount for the entire term. Later, the St. Louis Housing Authority intervened in this case, and Katrina was allowed to leave. On a real estate website, it's indicated that a month later, Maury's house was still sold. The house price wasn't disclosed. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.